The millionaire was paralyzed upon hearing the song his loved one used to sing before she disappeared. The bustling square was alive with the sounds of a typical Saturday afternoon. Street performers, tourists, and locals mingled in a cacophony of voices and music. Yet for Alfred Rothschild, the world might as well have been silent. The 60-year-old millionaire walked through the crowd, his mind a tangled mess of numbers, strategies, and deals. He had just left another exhausting business meeting, his thoughts still caught up in the intricacies of his latest acquisition. Alfred had built an empire, one that had brought him wealth beyond his wildest dreams. His name was synonymous with success in the business world, his face gracing the covers of countless financial magazines. But as he strolled along the tree-lined path that cut through the square, a deep loneliness gnawed at him. It was the kind of loneliness that no amount of money or success could fill. 25 years had passed, and still, the absence of Catherine, the woman he had once loved so deeply, haunted him. He remembered the day she vanished, as if it were yesterday. One moment they were planning their future together, and the next she was gone. No explanation, no trace. He had searched for her, of course, hired investigators, scoured every corner of the city, but nothing. As the years passed, he buried himself in work, telling himself that success was the only thing he had left. Suddenly a sound broke through his thoughts. A melody, soft and haunting, carried through the square like a gentle breeze. Alfred stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. That song, it was the same one Catherine used to hum when they were together. He turned his head, searching for the source of the music. There, sitting on a bench not far from where he stood, was a young woman. She was humming the tune, completely unaware of his presence. Her head was slightly bowed, long dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Alfred's breath caught in his throat as he approached her cautiously. There was something familiar about her, something that sent a jolt of recognition through him, though he couldn't quite place it. As he got closer, his eyes widened. The young woman looked almost exactly like Catherine, the same soft features, the same gentle expression. It was as if time had rewound itself, and Catherine was sitting before him once again, though younger, almost as young as when they had first met. His pulse quickened, and an overwhelming sense of déjà vu washed over him. She looked up, noticing him for the first time, and their eyes met. Alfred felt a chill run down his spine. The resemblance was uncanny. For a moment he couldn't speak. He stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice rough from the shock. I couldn't help but notice the song you're humming. It's beautiful. Where did you learn it?" The young woman smiled softly, a gesture so achingly familiar that Alfred felt his heart constrict. "Oh, it's something my mother used to sing to me when I was little," she replied. "I guess it just stuck with me." Alfred's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That's interesting," he said, his voice steady though inside his emotions were in turmoil. "It reminds me of someone I used to know." He paused, then added, "What's your name, if you don't mind me asking?" "Valerie," she replied, tilting her head slightly as if studying him. "And you are?" "Alfred," he said, feeling the weight of her gaze. There was something about her, something more than just her appearance, that drew him in. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just coincidence. As they fell into conversation, Alfred's mind raced with possibilities. Could this young woman be related to Catherine, distant niece or cousin? Or was it just his mind playing tricks on him, projecting his memories of Catherine onto this Stranon? Whatever the truth, Alfred knew one thing for certain: his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. As Alfred and Valerie continued their conversation in the square, he felt an inexplicable urge to know more about her. Every gesture, every inflection in her voice seemed to echo Catherine, stirring memories he had long tried to bury. "Are you from around here?" Alfred asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Valerie nodded. "I've lived here for a few years now. My mother and I moved around a lot when I was younger, but we've settled here for the time being." Alfred's heart quickened at the mention of her mother. "And your mother, is she?" "She's not well," Valerie said, a shadow passing over her face. She's been unwell for a long time. That's partly why we settled here, for the medical facilities." Alfred felt a pang of sympathy, mixed with a growing sense of urgency. He needed to know more, but he couldn't risk scaring Valerie away with too many questions. "Listen, Valerie," he said after a pause, his voice careful. "I don't want to intrude, but I might have an opportunity for you. I run a business and we're always looking for talented people. If you're interested, we could talk more about it." Valerie seemed surprised by the offer, but there was a spark of interest in her eyes. "That's unexpected," she said, smiling, "but I'm open to hearing more." They exchanged contact information, and Alfred felt a strange sense of relief. This was his chance to learn more about Valerie and potentially about Catherine. Over the next few weeks, Alfred arranged several meetings with Valerie under the guise of job interviews. Each encounter only deepened his suspicion and hope. The way she laughed, the tilt of her head when she was thinking, it was all so reminiscent of Catherine. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Alfred decided to take a risk. During one of their meetings, he carefully steered the conversation towards family. "Valerie," he began, his heart pounding, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's your mother's name?" Valerie looked at him, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "Why do you want to know?" Alfred took a deep breath. "Because I think I might have known her a long time ago. Her name, is it Catherine?" The color drained from Valerie's face. "How did you?" "Yes, that's her name. But how could you possibly know that?" In that moment, Alfred knew. The resemblance, the song, the timing, it all made sense. With trembling hands, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed him and Catherine, young and in love, their arms around each other. "Because," he said softly, turning the photo to face Valerie, "I loved her, and I think I might be your father." Valerie stared at the photograph, her eyes wide with shock. "No," she whispered. "No, that's impossible. My mother never talked about my father. She always said he wasn't in the picture." Alfred's heart ached at her words. "I didn't know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know she was pregnant when she disappeared. If I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both." Valerie stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back. "This is insane," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just drop something like this on me. I don't even know you." "I know it's a lot to take in," Alfred said, standing as well. "But please, Valerie, give me a chance to explain, to understand what happened. Don't you want to know the truth?" For a moment, Valerie looked torn between fleeing and staying. Then slowly she sank back into her chair. "I don't know what to believe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've spent my whole life wondering about my father. If there's even a chance." Alfred nodded, relief washing over him. "We'll figure this out together," he promised, "and we'll find out what happened to your mother. I never stopped looking for her, Valerie. I never stopped loving her." As they sat there, the weight of their newfound connection hanging between them, Alfred knew that this was just the beginning. The truth about Catherine's disappearance was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And now, with Valerie by his side, he had a reason to search again, not just for the woman he had lost, but for the family he never knew he had. The days following Alfred's revelation to Valerie were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. Despite her initial shock and disbelief, Valerie couldn't deny her curiosity about the father she'd never known. Together, they began the arduous task of piecing together Catherine's past and the circumstances of her disappearance. Alfred led Valerie into his study, a room lined with dark wood shelves and filled with the scent of old books and leather. He pulled out a dusty box from a locked cabinet, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. "These are all the files from the private investigators I hired over the years," he explained, spreading the documents across his desk. "We never found her, but maybe with your help we can see something I missed." Valerie picked up a photograph, studying her mother's youthful face. "She looks so happy here," she murmured. "It's hard to reconcile this image with the woman I grew up with." As they pored over the files, a clearer picture of Catherine's life before her disappearance began to emerge. She had been a promising young artist, her work just starting to gain recognition in local galleries. Alfred and Catherine had met at one of her exhibitions, falling quickly and deeply in love. "Your mother was incredible," Alfred said, his voice soft with nostalgia. She had this way of seeing the world that was entirely her own. Her paintings, they were like windows into her soul. Valerie listened intently, hungry for every detail about the mother she thought she knew. "She never picked up a paintbrush in all the years I knew her," she said. "It was like that part of her was just gone." As they delved deeper into the investigation, they discovered a crucial piece of information that had been overlooked before. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Catherine had been working on a series of paintings that she kept secret, even from Alfred. "I remember her being more withdrawn," Alfred recalled, frowning. "But I was so caught up in a big business deal at the time, I didn't push her to tell me what was wrong. God, I should have paid more attention." They decided to visit Catherine's old studio, which had been preserved all these years in the hope of a return. The space was dusty and filled with cobwebs, but as Alfred switched on the lights, it was like stepping back in time. Valerie gasped as she took in the unfinished canvases that lined the walls. "These are incredible," she breathed, moving closer to examine a particularly striking piece. It depicted a woman, clearly Catherine, standing at a crossroads, her face a mask of fear and indecision. As they explored the studio, Alfred noticed something odd about one of the walls. "This doesn't look right," he muttered, running his hand along the surface. With a bit of pressure, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a small, dark space. Inside, they found a collection of paintings unlike anything they had seen before. Dark, disturbing images filled the canvases, twisted figures, shadowy landscapes, and recurring motifs of chains and cages. "What was she afraid of?" Valerie whispered, her face pale as she took in the nightmarish scenes. Alfred shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know, but whatever it was, it must have been terrifying." Among the paintings, they discovered a small, leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, Alfred opened it, recognizing Catherine's delicate handwriting. As they read through the entries, a chilling narrative began to unfold. Catherine wrote of feeling watched, of strange phone calls in the middle of the night, and of a growing fear that someone from her past had found her. The journal entries became increasingly frantic and paranoid as the weeks progressed. The final entry, dated just days before her disappearance, read, "I can't run anymore. He's found me. I have to protect them, Alfred, and the baby he doesn't know about. I'm sorry, my love. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to go." Alfred staggered back, his face ashen. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew she was pregnant with you, Valerie. She left to protect us." Valerie, her own eyes filled with tears, placed a comforting hand on Alfred's shoulder. But who was she running from? Who was this man she was so afraid of? As they continued to search the studio, they came across a name that appeared multiple times in Catherine's journal: Stephen Blackwood. Alfred's blood ran cold at the sight of it. "Stephen," he said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "My former business partner. He and Catherine, they had a history before she and I got together, but I thought that was all in the past." Valerie's eyes widened. Could he be the one she was running from? Alfred nodded grimly. "It's possible. Stephen always had a dark side, an obsessive streak. After Catherine disappeared, he became increasingly erratic. Eventually, our partnership dissolved. I haven't seen or spoken to him in years." As the pieces began to fall into place, Alfred and Valerie shared a look of determination. They were closer to the truth than ever before, but the path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty. "We need to find Stephen," Alfred said, his jaw set. "He might be the key to understanding what really happened to your mother." Valerie nodded, a mix of fear and resolve in her eyes. "Whatever it takes," she agreed. "We've come too far to give up now." As they left the studio, both lost in thought about the revelations they'd uncovered, neither noticed the sleek black car parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing the watchful eyes within. The search for Catherine had begun in earnest, but little did they know that their actions had already set in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. As the days passed and their investigation deepened, the initial euphoria of their reunion began to fade, replaced by a growing tension between Alfred and Valerie. Their differing approaches to the search for Catherine and their conflicting emotions about the past started to create rifts in their newly formed relationship. One evening, as they sat in Alfred's study reviewing the latest information they had gathered, the simmering tension finally boiled over. "We need to go public with this," Valerie insisted, pacing the room. "If we release the information about Mum's disappearance and Stephen's possible involvement, someone might come forward with new leads." Alfred shook his head, his face etched with concern. "It's too risky, Valerie. We don't have enough concrete evidence yet. If we tip our hand too soon, Stephen could disappear, taking any chance of finding the truth with him." Valerie spun to face him, her eyes flashing with frustration. "And what if he's already gone? What if while we're sitting here, being cautious, he's out there covering his tracks?" "I've known Stephen for years," Alfred countered, his voice rising. "He's arrogant, overconfident. He won't run because he doesn't think he needs to. We need to be strategic about this." "Strategic?" Valerie scoffed. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like fear." Alfred stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You don't understand the kind of man we're dealing with. Stephen is dangerous, Valerie. If we're not careful, we could end up putting your mother in even more danger." "Don't talk to me like I'm a child," Valerie snapped. "She's my mother. I've spent my entire life watching her struggle, seeing the fear in her eyes without understanding why. But you don't get to swoop in after all these years and act like you know what's best for her." In the words hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Alfred recoiled as if he'd been physically struck, the pain evident in his eyes. "You're right," he said quietly after a moment. "I wasn't there. I didn't see her struggles, her fear. But Valerie, you have to understand, if I had known, if I had any idea that Catherine was pregnant, that you existed, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both." Valerie's anger deflated slightly, replaced by a weariness that seemed to age her beyond her years. "But you didn't know," she said softly. "And now here we are, 25 years later, trying to solve a mystery that's older than I am." Alfred sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every bit his age. "I know it's not easy trusting a stranger who claims to be your father. But I'm trying, Valerie. I want to make this right, not just for Catherine, but for you too." Valerie was quiet for a long moment, conflict clear on her face. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was little, I used to make up stories about my father. I imagined he was a secret agent or an explorer off on some grand adventure. Anything to explain why he wasn't there." She paused, meeting Alfred's gaze. "The reality is a lot more complicated, isn't it?" Alfred nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Life usually is. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you dreamed of, Valerie, but I'm here now, and I want to help. We both want to find Catherine, to understand what happened. Can't that be enough for now?" Valerie considered his words, then slowly nodded. "Okay," she said. "We'll do this your way for now. But Alfred, if we don't make progress soon, we do it my way. Deal?" "Deal," Alfred agreed, relief evident in his voice. As they shook hands, sealing their uneasy truce, both were acutely aware of the fragile nature of their relationship. They were united in their goal of finding Catherine, but the years of separation and the weight of unspoken resentment still lay between them. Alfred watched as Valerie gathered her things to leave, noticing for the first time how much she carried herself like Catherine, the same determined set of her shoulders, the same fierce glint in her eye. It was a bittersweet realization, a reminder of all he had lost and all he stood to gain. As Valerie reached the door, she paused, turning back to Alfred. "I may not be ready to call you Dad," she said softly, "but I'm glad we're in this together." With that, she was gone, leaving Alfred alone with his thoughts and the lingering hope that somehow, through this shared mission, they might find not just Catherine, but a way to bridge the gulf of years that separated them. The tension between Alfred and Valerie simmered beneath the surface as they continued their investigation. Despite their differences, they managed to work together, following leads and piecing together the puzzle of Catherine's disappearance. Their search eventually led them to Stephen Blackwood's lavish estate on the outskirts of the city. As they approached the imposing gates, Alfred felt a mixture of anger and apprehension. He hadn't seen Stephen in years, and the thought of confronting him about Catherine made his blood boil. Valerie, sensing his unease, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We're in this together, remember?" she said softly. Alfred nodded, grateful for her presence. They were buzzed through the gates and escorted to Stephen's study by a stone-faced butler. The room was opulent, filled with expensive artwork and antiques, a testament to Stephen's success and wealth. Stephen himself sat behind a massive oak desk, his dark eyes gleaming with the same arrogance Alfred remembered. He stood as they entered, a smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. Well, Alfred," Stephen said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" His gaze flickered to Valerie, a flash of recognition crossing his face before it was quickly masked. Alfred didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about Catherine, Stephen." Stephen's expression barely flickered, but Alfred caught the brief moment of surprise before it vanished behind a mask of indifference. "Catherine," he repeated, feigning confusion. "I haven't heard that name in years. Why bring her up now?" Valerie stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Because she's my mother, and we know you had something to do with her disappearance." Stephen's gaze hardened as he looked at Valerie, really seeing her for the first time. "I see the resemblance now," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, "I don't know what you think you know, but you're making a mistake by coming here and throwing around accusations." Alfred moved closer, his voice low and dangerous. "We're not here to make accusations, Stephen. We're here to give you a chance to confess. You took her, you destroyed her life and mine, and now you're going to face the consequences." For the first time, a flicker of something darker passed across Stephen's face. Anger, maybe even fear. He stood up slowly, his posture stiff, hands resting on the desk as he leaned forward. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Alfred. You never did." "Then enlighten us," Valerie challenged, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Tell us why you took my mother away, why you destroyed our family before it even had a chance to exist." Stephen's eyes narrowed, and Alfred could see the mask of control beginning to slip. "You're a fool, Alfred," he spat. "You always were. You had everything handed to you, your success, your wealth, even Catherine. You never appreciated any of it. And you couldn't stand it, could you?" Alfred shot back. "That's why you took her, because you couldn't handle the fact that she chose me." Stephen's face twisted with a mix of emotions, rage, pain, and something that looked almost like regret. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice low and intense. "Catherine was better off without you. She needed someone who could give her a real life, not someone who was too busy chasing deals and meetings to notice what he had." Alfred felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You didn't give her a life, Stephen. You took it from her. And now she's finally going to get it back." Stephen sneered, but there was a hint of desperation in his eyes now. "You think you can waltz in here after all these years and tear me down? I built everything I have with my own hands, and I won't let you or anyone else take that from me." "This isn't about your empire, Stephen," Alfred said, his voice steady. "It's about justice for Catherine, for Valerie. You didn't just take Catherine from me, you took her from her own daughter." Something shifted in Stephen's expression then. A flicker of recognition as he looked at Valerie. For a moment, his arrogant facade, revealing a glimpse of the man beneath, tired, haunted, and carrying the weight of his secrets. "You don't understand," Stephen said, his voice suddenly weary. "None of you do. I loved Catherine, truly loved her. Everything I did to protect her." Valerie stepped forward, her eyes searching Stephen's face. Protect her from what? Stephen sank back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him. "From the truth," he said softly, "from the danger that was coming for her and for you, Valerie." Alfred and Valerie exchanged shocked glances. This was not the confession they had expected. "What are you talking about?" Alfred demanded. Stephen reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn leather journal. "Catherine knew things," he said, pushing the journal across the desk. "Dangerous things about people in high places. She stumbled onto something she was never meant to see, and they were coming for her. With trembling hands, Alfred opened the journal. Inside, he found detailed notes and sketches, evidence of a far-reaching conspiracy involving powerful politicians and business leaders. Among the names, he saw his own, linked to deals and decisions he had no memory of making. "I don't understand," Alfred murmured, his world tilting on its axis. "How is this possible?" Stephen's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of pity and resignation. "Because they got to you too, Alfred. They erased parts of your memory, just like they tried to do to Catherine. I took her away to keep her safe, to keep both of them safe." He nodded towards Valerie. Valerie, who had been reading over Alfred's shoulder, looked up sharply. "You're saying my entire life, my mother's condition, it was all because of some conspiracy?" Stephen nodded grimly. "I'm not proud of the methods I used, but I did what I thought was necessary. Catherine's memory loss, her fear, it was partly my doing, to keep her from remembering the danger she was in. I thought I was protecting her." The room fell into stunned silence as the weight of Stephen's revelations sank in. Alfred felt as though the ground had disappeared from beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about his past, about Catherine's disappearance, had been turned upside down. Valerie was the first to break the silence, her voice shaking with emotion. "If what you're saying is true, then the real enemy is still out there. Us, and we've just walked right into their crosshairs by coming here, haven't we?" Stephen's grim nod was all the confirmation they needed. The truth they had sought for so long was finally within their grasp, but with it came the realization that their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. In the days following their confrontation with Stephen, Alfred and Valerie found themselves grappling with the weight of the revelations. The world they thought they knew had been turned on its head, and at the center of it all was Catherine, the woman they both loved, whose secrets had set this entire chain of events in motion. They decided it was time to bring Catherine into the fold. With Stephen's reluctant cooperation, they arranged to move her to a secure private medical facility where she could receive specialized care and potentially recover more of her memories. The reunion was emotional and fraught with tension. Catherine, still fragile from years of living with fractured memories and paranoia, was overwhelmed by the presence of both Alfred and Valerie. Her eyes darted between them, a mix of recognition and confusion evident in her gaze. "Alfred," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" Alfred approached her carefully, his heart aching at the sight of the woman he had loved for so long. "Yes, Catherine, it's me. I've been looking for you for so long." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she turned to Valerie. "And you, my beautiful girl, you've grown so much." Over the next few weeks, Catherine underwent intensive therapy and treatment. Slowly, painstakingly, her memories began to resurface. Each day brought new revelations, some heartwarming, others deeply disturbing. One afternoon, as Alfred and Valerie sat with her in her room, Catherine suddenly gripped Alfred's hand, her eyes wide with urgency. "The paintings," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "My paintings. They weren't just art, Alfred. They were messages." Alfred leaned in, his pulse quickening. "Messages about what, Catherine?" She closed her eyes, concentrating hard. "The conspiracy, the people involved. I couldn't risk writing it down, so I painted it, hidden in plain sight." Valerie gasped, remembering the disturbing canvases they had found in Catherine's old studio. "That's why they were so dark, so twisted. You were trying to warn us." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to leave you, either of you, but they were getting close. I had to protect you, especially you, Valerie. I knew they would use you to get to me if they found out about you." As more of Catherine's memories returned, a clearer picture of the conspiracy began to emerge. She spoke of a shadowy organization that had infiltrated the highest levels of government and business, manipulating events on a global scale. Alfred had unwittingly become involved through some of his business dealings, which explained the gaps in his own memory. "But why didn't they just silence you?" Alfred asked, struggling to understand. "Why go to such lengths to erase your memory and hide you away?" Catherine's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. because I hid something they desperately wanted, something that could bring their entire operation crashing down. What was it? Valerie asked, leaning forward. Catherine shook her head. I don't remember exactly. It's still foggy. But I know it was important, and I know I hid it somewhere they would never think to look. As the days passed, Catherine's strength grew both physically and mentally. With each recovered memory, she became more like the woman Alfred had fallen in love with all those years ago. But the shadow of the conspiracy loomed large over their reunion. One evening, as they sat together in Catherine's room, she suddenly sat up straight, her eyes wide with realization. "The locket," she exclaimed, "I remember now. I hid the evidence in my grandmother's locket." Alfred frowned, trying to recall. "The silver one with the rose engraving. But we searched everywhere for that after you disappeared." Catherine smiled, a hint of her old mischief glinting in her eyes. "Not everywhere. I left it in the one place I knew you'd never look, because it would hurt too much." Valerie looked between them, confused. "Where?" "Our special place," Alfred breathed, understanding dawning on his face. "The cliff overlooking the ocean where I proposed." Catherine nodded. "In the hollow of the old oak tree. I went there the night before I left, knowing it might be my last chance." The revelation sparked a flurry of activity. Alfred immediately arranged for a team to discreetly search the location. Hours later, they received confirmation the locket had been found, untouched after all these years. When the locket was brought to them, Catherine's hands shook as she opened it. Inside, they found a tiny microchip, barely larger than a grain of rice. "This is it," Catherine said softly. "This is what they've been looking for all these years. Names, dates, transactions, everything needed to expose their entire operation." The weight of this discovery settled over the room. They now held in their hands the key to unraveling a conspiracy that spanned decades and reached into the highest echelons of power. But with this knowledge came danger. They had just made themselves targets for some of the most powerful and ruthless people in the world. Alfred looked at Catherine and Valerie, the two women who meant everything to him. "What do we do now?" he asked. Catherine's face set in a determined expression that Alfred remembered so well. "We finish this," she said firmly. "We've lost too much, suffered too long. It's time to bring them down once and for all." Valerie nodded, reaching out to take both her parents' hands. Together, she said, "We'll face whatever comes next as a family." As they sat there, united for the first time in 25 years, they knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. That they also knew that together they had a chance to right the wrongs of the past and build the future they had been denied for so long. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, hope burned brightly in all their hearts. Just as Alfred, Catherine and Valerie were beginning to feel like a united front against the conspiracy they had uncovered, their world was once again thrown into chaos. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon as they were discussing their next moves in Alfred's study. A sharp knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Alfred's assistant, looking flustered, poked her head in. "Mr. Rothschild, there's someone here to see you. He's quite insistent." Before Alfred could respond, a young man pushed past the assistant and strode into the room. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing green eyes that immediately reminded Alfred of Catherine in her youth. The stranger's gaze swept over the room, landing on each of them in turn before settling on Alfred. "So," he said, his voice cold and filled with barely suppressed anger, "this is the happy family reunion. How touching." Alfred stood, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, who are you?" The young man's lips curved into a bitter smile. "You don't recognize me? I'm not surprised. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is James, and I'm your son." The room fell into stunned silence. Valerie was the first to recover, jumping to her feet. "That's impossible," she snapped. "I'm an only child." James turned his attention to her, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, the prodigal daughter. Tell me, how does it feel to be the chosen one?" Catherine, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, her voice trembling. "This can't be. I don't remember having another child." James laughed, but it was a harsh, humorless sound. "Of course you don't. That was rather the point, wasn't it? To forget everything, including your own son. Alfred stepped forward, his mind racing. Look, there's clearly been some mistake. We've only just started to uncover the truth about what happened 25 years ago. If you're who you say you are, we need to talk about this calmly. Calmly? James spat. I spent my entire life knowing I was abandoned, forgotten. And now I find out that not only is my father alive, but he's been playing happy families with my mother and sister. So no, I don't think I'll be calm. Valerie moved to stand beside Alfred, her posture defensive. You can't just barge in here and make these claims. We need proof. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, tossing it onto Alfred's desk. DNA test results, he said. Feel free to run your own tests, but I assure you they'll say the same thing. I am Alfred Rothschild's son. As Alfred picked up the folder with shaking hands, Catherine let out a soft gasp. The twins, she whispered, her face pale. I remember now, they were twins. All eyes in the room turned to her. Catherine's gaze was unfocused, lost in a memory that was only just resurfacing. When I found out I was pregnant, it was twins. But there were complications. I was told one of the babies didn't survive. James's bitter laugh cut through the room again. Oh, is that what they told you? How convenient. No, Mother, I survived. But I wasn't part of the grand plan, was I? So I was discarded, given away while you took my sister and ran. Alfred's mind was reeling. Twins, it seemed impossible. And yet he looked at James, really looked at him, and saw echoes of himself and Catherine in the young man's features. If what you're saying is true, Alfred said slowly, then you're as much a victim in all this as any of us. The people behind this conspiracy, they're the ones who separated our family. James scoffed. Save your platitudes. I'm not here for a family reunion. I'm here for what's rightfully mine. Valerie stepped forward, her eyes flashing. And what exactly do you think is rightfully yours? My inheritance, James said coldly. Half of everything Alfred Rothschild owns. I've lived my life in poverty while you've enjoyed the fruits of his empire. It's time for that to change. Alfred held up his hands, trying to diffuse the tension. James, please. This is a lot for all of us to take in. If you are my son, then yes, you have a right to a share in my estate. But there's so much more going on here than money. We're dealing with a dangerous conspiracy, one that's affected all our lives. We need to focus on that first. James's eyes narrowed. A convenient distraction. No, I won't be put off. I want what's mine, and I want it now. Either you acknowledge me as your son and give me what I'm owed, or I'll take this to the courts and the media. How do you think your precious reputation will fare when the world learns you abandoned your own son? The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Alfred, Catherine, and Valerie exchanged worried glances. They had only just begun to come together as a family, to unravel the mysteries of the past. Now, with James's appearance, they faced a new challenge, one that threatened to tear them apart just as they were finding their footing. As the tension in the room reached a fever pitch, they all realized that their fight had just become infinitely more complicated. The enemy was no longer just an external threat, but potentially within their own family. The quest for truth and justice had taken an unexpected and dangerous turn. The appearance of James had thrown the fragile balance of their newly reunited family into chaos. However, they had little time to process this new development before an even greater threat emerged from the shadows. It was late in the evening, 2 days after James's dramatic entrance. Alfred, Catherine, Valerie and a reluctant James were gathered in Alfred's study, attempting to navigate the complex emotions and legal implications of their situation. So the tension in the room was palpable, with James maintaining his hostile stance and the others trying to find a way to connect with him. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Before anyone could react, the large window behind Alfred's desk shattered, and several dark-clad figures swarmed into the room. Nobody move, a gruff voice commanded as flashlights beamed into their faces, momentarily blinding them. Alfred instinctively moved to shield Catherine and Valerie. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. A tall figure stepped forward, his face obscured by a mask. "We're here for the microchip, Mr. Rothschild. Hand it over, and nobody gets hurt." The realization hit Alfred like a thunderbolt. The criminal organization they had uncovered, the one Catherine's paintings had warned about, had found them, and they knew about the evidence hidden in the locket. "I don't know what you're talking about," Alfred said, buying time as his mind raced for a solution. The masked man chuckled darkly. "Come now, Mr. Rothschild. We know Catherine recovered her memories. We know about the locket and the microchip. Our patience is wearing thin." James, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What the hell is going on? What microchip?" One of the intruders turned towards James, his gun raised. "Shut up, kid. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," James spat back. "If you're threatening my family, it damn well concerns me." Despite the gravity of the situation, Alfred felt a small spark of hope at James's words. Perhaps there was a chance to bridge the gap between them after all. Catherine stepped forward, her voice surprisingly calm. "You're too late," she said to the masked leader. "The information on that chip has already been sent to multiple secure locations. If anything happens to us, it goes public immediately." The leader's posture stiffened, and there was a moment of tense silence. Then he spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "You're bluffing. Are you willing to take that chance?" Valerie chimed in, catching on to her mother's strategy. "You know what's on that chip. If it gets out, your entire organization crumbles." The intruders conferred among themselves in hushed tones. Alfred used this moment to catch Catherine's eye, silently asking if she had really sent the information. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. They were bluffing, but it was their only play. Finally, the leader turned back to them. "If what you're saying is true, then killing you now would be counterproductive. But make no mistake, this isn't over. You have 48 hours to turn over the chip and all copies of the information. If you don't, we'll be back, and we won't be so gentle next time." With that, the intruders retreated as swiftly as they had arrived, disappearing into the night and leaving the shattered window as the only evidence of their visit. As soon as they were gone, Alfred rushed to check on everyone. "Is anyone hurt?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. They all shook their heads, still in shock from the encounter. James was the first to break the silence that followed. "Would someone please tell me what the hell is going on?" he demanded. "What was all that about a microchip and some organization?" Alfred sighed heavily, realizing that they now had no choice but to bring James fully into the fold. Over the next hour, they explained everything: the conspiracy, Catherine's disappearance, the hidden paintings, and the evidence contained in the locket. As the full picture emerged, James's hostility began to fade, replaced by a mix of disbelief and concern. "So all this time, the reason I grew up without parents, it was because of this conspiracy." Catherine nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, James. I never knew they told me you didn't survive. If I had known, I would have never left you behind." For the first time since his arrival, James's hard exterior cracked, revealing the hurt and confused young man beneath. I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. Alfred placed a tentative hand on his son's shoulder. "I know this is a lot to take in, and we have a long way to go to make things right, but right now we're all in danger. We need to stick together if we're going to survive this." Valerie, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. "They said we have 48 hours. What are we going to do?" Hassan, Alfred's face set in determination. "We're not giving them that chip. The information on it is too important, but we can't just sit here and wait for them to come back either." "So what's the plan?" James asked, and Alfred felt a surge of relief at the lack of hostility in his tone. "We need to go on the offensive," Alfred said. "We have names and information about this organization. It's time we use it. We'll contact every trustworthy person we know in law enforcement, media, and government. We'll create so much noise and scrutiny that they won't be able to touch us without exposing themselves." Catherine nodded in agreement. "And we need to decrypt the rest of the information on the chip. There might be something there that can help us." As they began to formulate their plan, a new sense of unity settled over the room. The threat they faced had done what seemed impossible just hours before. It had brought them together as a family. They were no longer just individuals fighting their own battles, but a united front against a common enemy. The next 48 hours would be crucial. They had to move fast, be smart, and above all, trust each other. As they looked around at each other, Alfred, Catherine, Valerie, and James, they knew that despite their differences and the pain of the past, they were stronger together. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time they felt ready to face it head-on. The next 36 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Alfred, Catherine, Valerie, and James worked tirelessly to implement their plan, reaching out to contacts, decrypting data, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the criminal organization. As the deadline approached, however, the weight of their situation began to take its toll, bringing to the surface ethical dilemmas and forcing difficult decisions. It was during a rare moment of quiet, as they gathered in Alfred's study to review their progress, that the first cracks began to show. "I've been thinking," Valerie said, her voice hesitant. "Are we sure we're doing the right thing here? Exposing this conspiracy could destabilize governments, crash financial markets. Innocent people could suffer." James scoffed. "Innocent people are already suffering. These criminals have been manipulating the world for decades. They need to be stopped." "I agree they need to be stopped," Valerie countered. "But at what cost? We're talking about potentially throwing the world into chaos." Alfred leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. "Valerie has a point. The repercussions of this could be catastrophic. We need to consider the broader implications of our actions." Catherine, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "But if we don't expose them, we're complicit in their crimes. How can we live with that?" The room fell into an uneasy silence as they grappled with the moral quandary before them. It was James who finally broke the tension, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You know, growing up, I always imagined my parents as these larger-than-life figures who abandoned me for some grand, important reason," he said. "Now that I know the truth, I realize it wasn't grand at all. It was messy, complicated, and painful. But you're trying to do the right thing now. Isn't that what matters?" Alfred looked at his son, seeing him in a new light. "When did you get so wise?" he asked with a small smile. James shrugged. "I've had a lot of time to think about morality and consequences. When you grow up with nothing, you spend a lot of time wondering about the decisions that led you there." The moment of understanding between father and son was interrupted by Catherine's gasp. She had been working on decrypting more of the data from the microchip and had stumbled upon something shocking. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. So they gathered around her computer, and as they read the information on the screen, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The data revealed that the conspiracy went even deeper than they had imagined, implicating not just corrupt politicians and businessmen, but also detailing plans that, if implemented, could lead to global conflict. "This is bigger than us," Alfred said, his face pale. "If we don't stop this, the consequences could be unthinkable." Valerie nodded, her earlier reservations giving way to grim determination. "You're right. We have to expose them, whatever the cost." As they continued to dig deeper into the data, another troubling revelation came to light. Among the names of those involved in the conspiracy, they found someone they knew, Michael Chen, Alfred's longtime friend and business partner. Alfred stared at the screen in disbelief. "This can't be right. I've known Michael for years. He's been like a brother to me." Catherine placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "People aren't always what they seem, Alfred. We of all people should know that." The discovery of Michael's involvement presented a new ethical dilemma. Alfred had built his business empire with Michael by his side. Exposing him would not only mean betraying a friend, but could also potentially lead to the collapse of their company, putting thousands of employees out of work. "What do we do?" Alfred asked, looking around at his family. "If we expose Michael along with the others, it could destroy everything we've built. All those people who depend on us for their livelihoods." James leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sometimes doing the right thing means making hard choices." We can't protect one person at the expense of exposing the whole truth. Valerie nodded in agreement. James is right. We can't pick and choose who to expose. It has to be all or nothing. Catherine took Alfred's hand, her eyes filled with empathy. I know this is hard, Alfred, but remember why we're doing this. It's not just about us anymore. It's about stopping something terrible before it's too late. Alfred closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision on his shoulders. When he opened them again, there was a resolute look in his eyes. You're right, all of you. We can't compromise now, not when we're so close. We'll expose everything and deal with the consequences as they come. As they turned back to their work, now with renewed purpose, Alfred couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and sadness. Pride in the family they had become, united in the face of adversity. And sadness for the innocents lost, the friendships that would be destroyed, and the difficult road ahead. The clock was ticking down to their deadline. In less than 12 hours they would need to make their move. The world as they knew it was about to change, and they were the ones holding the match. As night fell over the city, they prepared themselves for the firestorm that was to come, knowing that whatever happened, they would face it together. As the deadline approached, tension filled Alfred's study. The family had worked tirelessly, preparing to release their evidence to carefully selected journalists, law enforcement officials, and government watchdogs. With just an hour left, they gathered for one final review of their plan. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out. Before anyone could react, the door burst open, and armed figures swarmed into the room. Nobody move, a familiar voice commanded. The leader of the group stepped forward, removing his mask to reveal a face that made Alfred's blood run cold. Michael, Alfred gasped, staring at his longtime friend and business partner. Michael Chen's face was a mask of cold determination. I'm sorry it's come to this, old friend, but we can't let you release that information. As Alfred's mind reeled from the betrayal, he noticed other familiar faces among the intruders. There was Judge Harrison, who had presided over some of his company's most crucial legal battles. Senator Williams, a longtime supporter of his philanthropic efforts. Even Davis, his trusted head of security. How deep does this go? Alfred asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For Michael's lips curled into a humorless smile. Deeper than you could ever imagine, Alfred. We've built a system that maintains order, that keeps the world running smoothly. Did you really think we'd let you destroy all that? Catherine stepped forward, her eyes blazing with anger. You call this order? Manipulating governments? Destroying lives? You're nothing but criminals. We're visionaries, Michael countered. We see the bigger picture. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. James scoffed. And I suppose my life was one of those sacrifices, separating me from my family. That was for the greater good. For the first time, Michael's composure faltered. That was an unfortunate necessity. We couldn't risk Catherine remembering, and 2 children would have been too conspicuous. Valerie, who had been quietly edging towards her laptop, suddenly spoke up. Well, your necessity ends now. While you've been monologuing, I've initiated the release of all our evidence. It's too late to stop it. Michael's face contorted with rage. He raised his gun, pointing it directly at Valerie. You foolish girl! Do you have any idea what you've done? What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Alfred lunged forward, attempting to shield Valerie. James, reacting on instinct, tackled Michael. In the chaos that ensued, a shot rang out. When the dust settled, Alfred found himself on the floor, a searing pain in his shoulder. Catherine was at his side in an instant, pressing her hand against the wound. Alfred, stay with me, she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. As Alfred's vision blurred, he saw James struggling with Michael, while Valerie frantically typed on her laptop, likely ensuring the complete dissemination of their evidence. The other intruders seemed unsure, their loyalties visibly shaken by the unfolding events. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos. Federal agents. Everyone freeze. The room was flooded with light as a team of FBI agents stormed in. Led by a woman Alfred recognized as Agent Sarah Martinez, one of the few officials they had trusted with their information. Drop your weapons. Agent Martinez commanded. "Michael Chen, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and a host of other charges we'll be sorting out to come." As Michael and his accomplices were being handcuffed, Alfred felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had done it. The truth was out. But their ordeal wasn't over yet. As paramedics rushed in to tend to Alfred's wound, Agent Martinez approached the family, her expression grave. "Mr. Rothschild, we need to talk," she said. "What you've uncovered, it goes beyond anything we could have imagined. The level of corruption, the scope of this conspiracy, it's unprecedented." Alfred nodded weakly. "We know. That's why we had to expose it, no matter the cost." Agent Martinez's next words, however, sent a chill through the room. "There's more. In the data you provided, we found evidence of an imminent threat. A plan set in motion years ago, triggered to activate if the conspiracy was ever exposed." Catherine gasped. "What kind of threat?" "Oh, a series of coordinated attacks on major cities around the world," Agent Martinez explained, "designed to create global chaos, allowing the conspirators to reshape the world order in the aftermath." The weight of this revelation settled heavily on the family. Their actions, meant to bring justice, had inadvertently set in motion a potentially catastrophic chain of events. "How long do we have?" Valerie asked, her voice shaking. "Hours at most," Agent Martinez replied. "We're mobilizing every resource we have, but we need your help. The fail-safe for this plan, the only way to stop it, is hidden within the data you've collected. We need to find it, fast." As the paramedics worked to stabilize Alfred, the family exchanged determined looks. Despite their exhaustion, despite the shock and trauma they'd endured, they knew their fight wasn't over. "You'll do whatever it takes," Alfred said, wincing as he tried to sit up. "This is our mess. We need to fix it." James, who had been quiet since the agents arrived, suddenly spoke up. "I think I might know where to look. In the data about the project that separated our family, there was something odd, a section that seemed out of place." Valerie nodded, already turning back to her laptop. "You're right. I noticed it too. But we were so focused on the conspiracy itself, we didn't dig deeper." As Valerie and James huddled over the computer, working with the FBI's cybersecurity experts to unravel the final puzzle, Alfred looked at Catherine, and in her eyes he saw a mixture of fear, determination, and love. "Whatever happens," he said softly, taking her hand, "I'm glad we're together again." Catherine squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "We'll get through this, Alfred. We've come too far to fail now." As the race against time began, the Rothschild family found themselves at the center of a global crisis. The truth they had fought so hard to expose had set in motion events that threatened to tear the world apart. Now they had to use every resource at their disposal, every ounce of their combined intelligence and determination, to prevent a disaster of their own making. The final battle was just beginning, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and it all rested on the shoulders of a family that had only just begun to heal its own deep wounds. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. Alfred's study had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with FBI agents, cybersecurity experts, and the Rothschild family working side by side to prevent global catastrophe. Despite the pain from his gunshot wound, Alfred refused to leave. He sat propped up in his chair, Catherine by his side, offering guidance onside as Valerie and James worked tirelessly to decrypt the final layers of data. As the deadline drew nearer, the tension in the room was palpable. Suddenly, James let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it!" he exclaimed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The fail-safe, it's a series of kill codes hidden within the data about the project that separated our family. Valerie leaned in, her eyes widening as she saw what James had uncovered. "Of course," she breathed. "They hid it in plain sight, thinking no one would ever piece together the full story of what happened to us." Agent Martinez rushed over. "Can you activate it?" James nodded, but his expression was grim. Yes, but there's a catch. The system is designed to require simultaneous activation from multiple locations around the world. We'll need to coordinate with international agencies and fast. What followed was a whirlwind of diplomatic negotiations and technological coordination as government agencies worldwide scrambled to input the kill codes. The Rothschild family watched the clock tick down with bated breath. With mere minutes to spare, confirmation came through. The imminent attacks had been thwarted. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room, but it was short-lived. The real work was only just beginning. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the shattered window of the study, the full consequences of their actions began to unfold. News channels exploded with reports of high-profile arrests, stock markets plummeted, and protests erupted in cities around the world as people demanded answers from their governments. Alfred watched the chaos unfold on multiple screens, his heart heavy. "We did the right thing," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else, "didn't we?" Catherine squeezed his hand. "We did what we had to do. The truth had to come out." But the truth, as they were learning, was a double-edged sword. As the day progressed, they received news that shook them to their core. The exposure of the conspiracy had far-reaching consequences, some of which they had never anticipated. Valerie burst into the room, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said, turning up the volume on one of the news channels. The reporter's voice filled the room. In a shocking turn of events, evidence has surfaced implicating Alfred Rothschild, the billionaire philanthropist, in several of the conspiracy's early operations. While it appears Mr. Rothschild later broke ties with the organization, questions are being raised about his level of involvement and knowledge of their activities. Alfred felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I never knowingly participated in any of their schemes." But as more reports flooded in, a terrible realization began to dawn on him. There were gaps in his memory, decisions he had made years ago that now seemed questionable in hindsight. Had he been an unwitting pawn in their game all along? James, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "There's more," he said quietly. "They're calling for all of us to be brought in for questioning. Me, Valerie, even Mom. They're saying we might have been complicit given our access to the information." The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of their situation sank in. They had exposed the truth, but in doing so, they had also exposed themselves to scrutiny and potential prosecution. Agent Martinez, who had been coordinating with her superiors, approached the family. Her expression was a mix of sympathy and professional detachment. "I'm sorry," she began, "but given the new evidence that's come to light, we're going to need all of you to come with us for formal questioning." Alfred nodded, a sense of resignation settling over him. "We understand. We'll cooperate fully." As they prepared to leave, Alfred pulled his family close. "No matter what happens," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "know that everything I've done out of love for you, for all of you." Catherine's eyes shimmered with tears. "We know, Alfred, and we'll get through this together." Valerie and James exchanged a look, then stepped forward to embrace their parents. For a moment they stood there, a family united in the face of an uncertain future. When they were led out of the house, a crowd of reporters had gathered, their cameras flashing incessantly. Alfred straightened his shoulders, determined to face whatever came next with dignity. In the days and weeks that followed, the Rothschild family found themselves at the center of a global firestorm. Every aspect of their lives was scrutinized, every decision questioned. The media painted them alternately as heroes who had exposed a great evil and as willing participants in a vast conspiracy. Truth, as always, was far more complex. As investigators dug deeper into Alfred's past, they uncovered evidence of manipulation and coercion. It became clear that while he had been involved in some of the organization's activities, he had been skillfully maneuvered into positions where he had little choice but to comply. The family faced grueling interrogations and legal battles. Their assets were frozen, their reputations tarnished. But through it all, they clung to each other and to the belief that they had done what was necessary. Months passed and slowly the full picture began to emerge. The world learned of the sacrifices the Rothschild family had made, the pain they had endured, and the courage they had shown in exposing the truth. Public opinion began to shift. While there were still those who called for harsh punishment, many saw the family as victims who had ultimately chosen to do the right thing, even at great personal cost. As the legal proceedings drew to a close, Alfred stood before the court for sentencing. He looked at his family in the gallery, Catherine, Valerie, and James, their faces etched with worry, but their eyes filled with love and support. "Your Honor," Alfred began, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, "I stand before you today not to make excuses for my past actions, but to take responsibility for them. I was blind to the true nature of what I was involved in, but that blindness was a choice, one I must now reckon with." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "However, when the truth became clear, my family and I chose to expose it, knowing full well the consequences we might face. We did so because we believe that the truth, no matter how painful, is always preferable to a comfortable lie." As Alfred continued his statement, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. Whatever the outcome, he knew that they had done the right thing. They had faced the truth, both the ugly and the beautiful parts of it, and had chosen to stand on the side of justice. The road ahead would not be easy, but as he looked at his family, Alfred knew that together they could face anything. They had uncovered the truth, and in doing so, had finally uncovered the true strength of their bond as a family. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Alfred stood tall, his family seated behind him, their faces a mixture of anxiety and hope. The past year had been a roller coaster of legal battles, public scrutiny, and personal introspection. "Mr. Rothschild," the judge began, her voice firm but not unkind, "this court has carefully considered all the evidence presented, including your willing cooperation and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding your involvement in this conspiracy." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom before settling back on Alfred. "While the law demands that there be consequences for your actions, it also recognizes the immense service you and your family have done for this country and indeed the world by exposing this far-reaching conspiracy." Alfred's heart raced as he waited for the final judgment. "Therefore, it is the decision of this court that you be sentenced to 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. Furthermore, you will be required to use your considerable resources and expertise to assist in the ongoing efforts to dismantle the remnants of the conspiracy and to aid in the recovery efforts for those affected by it." A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed by a buzz of whispers. Alfred felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't freedom, but it was a chance to make amends, to rebuild, to do good. As the judge continued to outline the terms of his sentence, Alfred turned to look at his family. Catherine's eyes were brimming with tears of relief, while Valerie and James wore matching expressions of cautious optimism. Once the court was adjourned, Alfred was finally able to embrace his family. "It's over," he whispered, holding them close. "We can start to move forward now." The following months were a period of adjustment and healing for the Rothschild family. Alfred threw himself into his mandated community service with the same vigor he had once applied to his business dealings. He worked tirelessly to help those who had been affected by the conspiracy, using his connections and resources to rebuild lives and communities. Catherine, inspired by her experiences, started a foundation to support victims of manipulation and coercion. Her work became instrumental in helping people reclaim their lives and identities after being caught in the web of the conspiracy. Valerie, who had always had a keen mind for technology, redirected her skills towards cybersecurity. She began working with government agencies to develop better systems to prevent future large-scale conspiracies from taking root. James, perhaps, underwent the most profound transformation. The anger and resentment that had driven him for so long gradually gave way to a desire to connect with the family he had been denied. He started spending more time with Alfred, learning about the business world and discovering that he had inherited his father's acumen for deals and negotiations. As the world slowly recovered from the shock of the conspiracy's exposure, the Rothschild family found themselves navigating a new normal. Their name, once synonymous with wealth and power, now carried a complex legacy. Some still viewed them with suspicion, while others hailed them as heroes who had sacrificed everything for the truth. One crisp autumn evening, 2 years after the court's verdict, the family gathered at Catherine's small art studio. She had finally found the courage to pick up her brushes again, and this night marked her first exhibition in over 2 decades. As Alfred walked through the gallery, arm in arm with Catherine, he was struck by the vibrancy of her new works. Gone were the dark, foreboding images of her past. In their place were paintings full of light and hope, scenes of family, of healing, of new beginnings. "They're beautiful," Alfred murmured, squeezing Catherine's hand. "Just like you." Catherine smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you, without all of you," she said, looking around at Valerie and James, who were chatting with guests nearby. As the evening wore on, Alfred found a quiet moment to slip away to the small balcony overlooking the city. He was soon joined by James, who handed him a glass of champagne. "Quite a turn of events, isn't it?" James said, leaning against the railing. "2 years ago, I wanted nothing more than to tear this family apart. Now I can't imagine my life without you all." Alfred nodded, feeling a surge of affection for his son. "Life has a way of surprising us. I'm just grateful we've had this chance to become a real family." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne and looking out at the twinkling city lights. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next for us." Alfred turned to him, intrigued. "Oh, what did you have in mind?" James smiled, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I was thinking it might be time to rebuild the Rothschild empire, but differently this time, ethically, transparently, using our resources and influence to make real, positive changes in the world." Alfred felt a spark of pride and hope ignite in his chest. "I think that's a wonderful idea, son, and I'd be honored to help you make it a reality." As they rejoined the party, Alfred looked around at his family, Catherine radiant among her artwork, Valerie animatedly discussing her latest cybersecurity project with a group of interested listeners, and James, now moving confidently through the crowd, every inch the businessman he was born to be. In that moment, Alfred realized that despite all the pain, all the hardships they had endured, they had emerged stronger. The conspiracy that had torn them apart had ultimately brought them together, forging bonds that could never be broken. The road ahead would not be easy. There would still be challenges to face, wounds to heal, and trust to rebuild. But as Alfred raised his glass in a silent toast to his family, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The truth had set them free, free to love, free to heal, and free to build a new legacy. A legacy not of wealth or power, but of integrity, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As the exhibition wound down and guests began to leave, the Rothschilds gathered together for a moment of quiet celebration. They had weathered the storm, faced their demons, and come out the other side. Now, with the dawn of a new day on the horizon, they were ready to write the next chapter of their story together. In the depths of our darkest moments, when secrets threaten to tear us apart and the weight of the past seems unbearable, remember this truth. No matter how painful, is the foundation of genuine connection. It takes immense courage to confront our mistakes, to face the consequences of our actions, and to choose integrity over comfort. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the bonds we forge through shared struggles and unwavering support. Even when separated by time, distance, or misunderstanding, the ties that bind us can be rekindled stronger than ever. Life rarely unfolds as we expect. The villains in our story might be closer than we think, and the heroes may emerge from unexpected places. But it's in these twists of fate that we discover our true strength and the depth of our capacity to love and forgive. Every decision we make ripples out into the world, affecting lives we may never know. Choose wisely, act with compassion, and always strive for the greater good, even when the path is unclear and the cost is high. Redemption is not a destination but a journey. It's found in the small acts of kindness, in the courage to change, and in the willingness to rebuild what was broken. No matter how far we've fallen, there's always a chance to rise, to heal, and to create a legacy of love and integrity. In the end, it's not our successes or our failures that define us, but how we face the truth, how we treat those around us, and the love we nurture in our hearts. For in that love, we find our true wealth, our real power, and our enduring legacy. As we wrap up this emotional journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, touched your heart, or made you reflect on your own life, why not leave a simple one in the comments? It's a quick way to show your appreciation and connect with others who were moved by the Rothschild family's struggles and triumphs. Of course, storytelling is an art of perspective, and I'm sure some of you may have different views on certain aspects of the tale. If there are parts you disagree with or would have approached differently, please feel free to share your insights. Your unique perspective could spark interesting discussions and add depth to our shared experience. Lastly, if you enjoyed this story and would like to support our team's efforts to bring more compelling narratives to life, consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and encourages us to continue crafting stories that challenge, inspire, and touch the heart. Remember, every comment, every subscription is a voice in our growing community. Let's keep the conversation going and the stories flowing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.